Hello and welcome. You're listening to Afghanistan by Afghans. I'm your host, Misak, and I get into conversations with other Afghans in the diaspora and around the world, just as a way to introduce them, for you to know them and know us, and just kind of learn about multi layer stories and our lives and histories. And today's guest is very multi layered. David, who you can also call David or Daoud in Farsi, as we may call him, is an architect whose family actually comes from the Hindus and Sikhs of Afghanistan, a religious minority, Afghanistan's largest religious minority. And he's an amazing architect with a lot of great projects in the LA area for the past 20 or so years, I believe. So I'm excited to get this conversation started. And one thing you as an audience do not get to see is all the technical difficulties that goes behind the scenes. And this is our second try. So this time around, we're going to get all the technicalities right and hopefully have a smooth conversation. So I'd like to smoothly welcome David. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. So we're going to start with the journey of your forefathers from Afghanistan to the US. Tell me just a little bit about your father being from Afghanistan and then also your mom being from Cuba. But let's start with your dad.
All right. Yeah, my dad, Wishwa Kapoor, he was born in Kabul in 1948. I mean, there's no birthdays, but that's in the spring. Yeah, he grew up in a neighborhood called Hindu Guzar, which is in Kabul, in Shore Bazaar neighborhood. And it's like a narrow town, narrow streets, alleyways, kind of connecting these 3-4 story buildings with courtyards, which had intergenerational living. So he lived with 6 other families that were all his aunts and uncles. And yeah, our family has the Kapoors and the Meras and other Hindu families in this neighborhood have been there for hundreds of years. Yeah. My father wrote this book. It's like a memoir of his life that he just wrote to capture the stories and the history. And
show us the cover one more time because you did the cover.
Yeah, I designed.
You're doing the cover.
Yeah, so it's a map of Kabul, and then there's Shore Bazaar here. I don't know. This is a 1960s map. So the crazy thing, Kabul is so much bigger now. But a lot of this part hasn't been developed. And then, yeah, Shore Bazaar is down here, and the Hindu Guzar neighborhood's right around there. So,
yeah, that's wonderful.
Okay. Yeah.
It's called Leaving and Standing?
Leaving and Staying. He wanted to call it No Toys, but I guess it's his life of leaving and staying places, I guess. I don't know. It's a working title. He wants to work on the book more.
Great. You revealed his working title. You made it official now. So what are some of the stories? What type of stories has he been able to write down so far?
Just capturing, the history of the family being there for so long. My great-great-grandfather being a Sikh, as we were talking about before. Shingo Singh was his name, but they were having trouble just being harassed for being Sikh with the long hair and the turban and the long beard. So he decided that we would all like shave and cut our hair and be Hindu instead, like take on that identity. But my grandfather and him, they all still were active. They all had the Garant at home, and they participated in the Gurdwara. So even my grandfather was active in a Kabul Gurdwara, and my dad too. And then my dad, so he went to Habibia High School, and he started to excel at studies. And he was fortunate enough in his senior year to get a American Field Service scholarship. He was able to go to Michigan to this small town called Allegan and spend a year there at their high school, which was like a culture shock for him coming from Afghanistan. But
they were called the Daveeds.
They were called the Davids. Yeah.
David.
French name. So it was David. Yeah. And he was the granddad was I called him it's like my American grandparents. I never got to meet my grandparents on either side. So these became my adopted grandparents. But yeah, it's the David family.
And you were named after them?
Yes, yeah, David, like the French pronunciation, but my mom's from Cuba, so it's the Spanish pronunciation as well. and then it's like Daoud, which is a name in my family from Afghanistan. So
That's beautiful. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about I will briefly mention that your mom as well, because your mom's history with Cuba as well, and then how they met. That was a sweet story. And then
totally, yeah. I mean, it was my mom was born in Santiago de Cuba, and after her dad, her mom was from Guantanamo, actually, like a second generation from Guantanamo, which is a weird kind of sad Afghan connection there, like the most
Mhm.
Afghan city, unfortunately, in Cuba uh, now. But they, so she grew up there. Her dad was from Barcelona, but he had moved there when he was 9, and they had a family. I mean, they had like a general store, a lumber yard kind of thing, and they had supported the revolution. My grandfather had guns in the store that he was hiding, and then when Castro took over, he stayed at my uncle's house in the Vista Alegre neighborhood of Santiago. But somehow, like Fidel he killed a lot of his political like rivals, like people who were also community leaders. So things went sour. He killed like my uncle's friend and some family, like uncle, or not, but like second, relative. So my grandfather sent my mom to the United States, to St. Louis.
For safety reasons.
Yeah, he was, and my uncle too. He sent my uncle, so they couldn't take anything out of the country. But and then the grandparents later came, and they lived with my uncle in Texas City, Texas, of all places. Uh, but yeah, I never got to meet them either. But my mom, so she went to this small Catholic school called Maryville, and was taken in by the nuns there in St. Louis. And then there was my dad he got a scholarship to Washington University to study chemical engineering. And they were at this international students beach party in the Ozarks Lake, and they met there, and they just started dating in college, and they they got married right after graduation.
Mhm.
And before
Wow.
my dad had to return to Afghanistan to teach as like a visa requirement for a student visa, he had to come back and teach at Kabul
Mhm.
University in 1971.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wow.
yeah, so
And you were born in, where were you born in?
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania,
Mhm.
in '79. So he had come back because he wasn't getting paid at the university and things were falling apart, and he had a medical scholarship to Washington University, and he had my mom. So he came back, and yeah, and then they moved to Pittsburgh a month before I was born from Miami, which
Mhm.
were a lot of Cubans. So it was culture shock for both of them. We moved to this white Anglo-Saxon Protestant neighborhood called Fox Chapel in the woods, which is a beautiful place, but everyone's Presbyterian, for generations. It was given by George Washington to a Presbyterian preacher after the American Revolution, so that Presbyterians would never be persecuted. So it's like a strong identity. The
Mhm.
church is like really big, right next to the city hall, like catty corner. So yeah, it was really weird for both of them, but it was close to the city of Pittsburgh, so the city of Pittsburgh has some interesting culture.
Yeah. And how was that experience of growing up in a city like that for yourself?
I love Pittsburgh. It's a great city, but it is it's a white and black city, really, like, and they're really segregated. And then there's nothing in between. So there's no Asians, there's no Latinos, and we were both of those things.
Mm.
So all my friends ended up being the other. Like, I had an Indian Irish friend, and I had another Indian friend, and I had some white friends too, and an Asian, like a couple. There was only a few, like, at my school. But I didn't have a hard time. My sister has darker skin than me, as my dad does, and she had a harder time with like racial slurs. But
Mhm.
and just even from the teachers, and it's an exclusionary place.
Mhm.
Like, there's a golf club that you can't join unless you're Presbyterian. Like, you have to be white, of course, but you also have to be Presbyterian. So it's just, but I had a great experience just in the woods. I was mountain biking and rowing on the river. We had like a rowing team at the school. It was a very good school. I got a great education, and I got a
Mhm.
scholarship to University of Southern California School of Architecture here. So I moved here when I was 18. It was a pretty good deal they gave me. Um,
Mhm.
and it's a great school. So and when I got to LA, I was like, oh wow, it's like I'm not even weird here. It's just like this is just this
You're
is
like, this is not Kansas anymore.
yeah, no one cares that you're whatever
Right.
Afghan. Whereas if you're back in Pittsburgh, it's like the main question. Everyone's generation's deep there, but I love it. I actually love Pittsburgh a lot.
Yeah.
But it's great to. I just need like a place like Los Angeles, especially Central LA, where there's just people from all over the world.
Hmm.
It's great, and it sounds a lot like the what my dad loved about Old Kabul, or like what they would talk about, how it was like a melting pot.
Of diversity. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's so true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, Now, you mentioned kind of spending your time in your young days in the woods and such. And I know this because we have had this conversation. Is that is the inspiration for you going into architecture, perhaps? So tell us a little bit about kind of how did the woods and nature inspire you to become an architect?
yeah, it was kind of these woods across the street from my house. I was able to go down this driveway and just had miles of trails and creek crossings. And then when I was, 16 or so, there was like this development that just cleared the forest, this one part, not the whole forest, but a large part of it, and just built this like just graded it out flat and built this horrible like subdivision with cul-de-sacs and separate houses. So it's just that kind of like environmental devastation, seeing how the world, like where the climate's, we're all gonna die because like the climate's going nuts. We're not gonna have any water. It's getting too hot, and it's kind of a big reason is this car-based lifestyle that we have. Where we've built asphalt oceans everywhere. We've destroyed all the trees and the softscape that we have. So is that kind of that kind of destruction of nature? I always thought that I wanted people to live in synergy with nature together, and like kind of have an architecture that's more natural and climate responsive.
Hmm. Were there initially any architects that did incorporate this marriage, beautiful marriage of nature and art that you saw and were inspired by?
I mean, that was a great thing about growing up in Western Pennsylvania, because the Falling Water is really close by the one of the most famous houses in America, the Frank Lloyd Wright house that's built over a waterfall.
Uh-huh.
So my parents actually took me there a lot, like when we were young. I couldn't even go inside until I was 10, but it's just this cantilever deck over a waterfall. It's kind of incredible. But also, like, yeah, the temples that my dad would have, big, the big giant Buddha carved into the side of the hill in Kabul, like that kind of, it's like, but there's an occupiable space, like that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So we have a big picture of that, and then a big temple with the geometric shapes. Just
So you were exposed to Afghanistan's architectural history or elements as a young person?
Yeah, I mean, especially I think the early fascinations, like the rugs and the pattern
Okay.
on the rug, because my dad has a great rug collection actually that I've inherited a couple.
Okay. Tell me about that. Tell me how are the rugs inspired architecture?
Well, I mean, it's just like the geometric patterns across the edge, and then they're very architectural, kind of with the tessellations and these kind of like hexagonal shapes that are subdivided, where you could see it being like a dome, like
Mm.
extruding parts of it. But then also just the pictures of the temples and my parents would take me out to cities, just like to downtown Pittsburgh, see the buildings, like the rivers, the bridges were incredible. But also just trees, trees are a big thing. Like those are some of the most amazing structures around, and how they all interconnect around. So it's also like,
Mhm.
why do we build these skyscraper downtowns where all the buildings aren't touching each other? They should all be interconnected up above.
Mhm. Oh, very cool. That's
And that, yeah,
and
I think
so
one of the key things too that drove me is just like it's about people, like design. It's really about connecting people with each other. And I think the way we have with a car-based lifestyle and separate houses and separate uses, it's like separating everyone from each other. I think it's really dangerous where we don't have that whole
mm,
community, like
right.
what they
And
wanted.
you're talking about
Yeah,
the Havelis, like compare that to the structures that your dad was raised in and grew up in. The Havelis, like that's what you're talking about,
yeah.
kind of
Courtyard housing, yeah, with the six units or so, or eight, whatever,
right.
around a central courtyard. I built a model of one. I gave it to my dad for this project.
Oh,
So we worked together to draw the plans. Yeah, and then it has the kitchen on the roof, but everyone's living together, right? Six generations or six families together, co-housing. but even the streets, that their walls are shared walls, shared roofs. You can kind of like walk from one house to the next.
Interesting. So architecturally, you would say that the architectural of Afghanistan, from what you've seen, is more interconnected to the community and the way of their way of living.
I mean, the traditional kind. I mean, even my dad in this book is recounting how, like, after the 60s, like, people started to move out into the apartment buildings, and even in his neighborhood, he found that like a lot of that went away with the new style of apartment buildings. But yeah, the traditional Afghan, like the Hindu Guzar neighborhood, I think would be a great example. I think some of it is still intact. I haven't been there, unfortunately. I really want to visit. But yeah, I mean, how it's just like a 9-foot alleyway or 10-foot alleyway, and then you can connect with each other's walls so you can share resources. The kitchens are on the roof. I just 6 families living together. That's illegal, actually, in America, as we were talking about before we started. Like, just the planning code of Los Angeles, like, you can't have 6 families live in most parts of the city because it's zoned for single family residential, and most you can have 2. I mean, you can do it by getting creative, but you can't build a structure like that.
Yeah, and you have built some really great structures that or art projects that we'll get into a few of them that incorporate nature into that. Tell me a little bit about the parking turn to park project. I don't know what you call it, but tell us a little bit about that. What was the inspiration behind that, and how did that get started?
Right, that's an outgrowth of some of my activism for like better walking conditions, more green space, better parks, better transportation in Los Angeles, through an effort downtown, but citywide. And we created a citywide program called People Street out of this initiative, which allowed community. It's like a kit of parts where any community can just take a couple underutilized parking spaces, or there's a lot of like redundant parts of the roadway that have been converted to parks, like where you have an extra turn lane, but then there's another way to get there, so you don't need that road, and converted them into community spaces. So yeah, we built some of the first ones downtown on Spring Street between 5th and 6th, and just because people were getting hit by cars, it was like a 5-lane freeway, and then we converted the 2 lanes to 24-hour parking, and we put a bike lane in that was buffered. Working with the city, so it's just like a lot of people working together to make these decks. But I really developed like the structural details, working with a bunch of like engineers and hydraulic engineers, structural engineers, to like bolt into the curb and allow the stormwater to still go and have like a level, accessible deck. And we built a number of these like parklet projects, they're called.
You say People's Project. What was the title?
Street, yeah. So after we built a couple of these, and then because we had to get it approved by all these engineers in the city, like by LADOT and the Bureau of Engineering, they were worried about the stormwater, they were worried about the safety and the perimeter. So I have like this bolted perimeter that can like stop a car, which they actually don't want anymore because then it'll kill the driver. But we built these. We got these projects approved, and then this Department of Transportation hired us to do this program called People Street. These kits of parts for parklets and plazas is what it's called.
Okay, that's beautiful, and they still stand today, right? I mean, people can check these out.
There's one on York. I mean, it has led to the whole al fresco dining program, actually, which is less intense than what we did, where you're able to just put tables on the street. So they're everywhere now, those kind of spaces. But the ones we did, there's a few in Palms, and in Highland Park there's one, and there's one in Rancho Cucamonga still. And then I mean, we've also been able to build some good housing lately that is like more natural, like with natural products.
And where are these houses being built?
We built 2 houses with this responsive homes company, where it's this guy Michael who wants to build climate responsive homes. He's really obsessed with it. So we built them with a cork facade it's like 2-inch shiplap cork, so they look like these cork kind of volumes. There's one in Highland Park, there's one in Glassell Park that we've built recently. And yeah, it's all natural materials inside, like all this like natural hydraulic lime plaster that doesn't need to be painted, kind of an ancient material. and the wood is all salvaged from local street trees from Angel City Lumber. And it's just designing based on the sun, like limiting apertures, and putting the windows at the right spot so it won't get too hot.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I've seen one of those where it was like they were using air. I don't know how it worked. Now I'm not going to get into the technicalities, but kind of to use the airflow, cool airflow coming from ground up and going and kind of keeping it cool without the need for an air conditioning. That was just one project I saw. I don't know if you know which on that one.
Yeah, I mean that sounds a lot like the classic courtyard house in Kabul, like where the fountain's in the middle of the courtyard, and then the airflow cools the courtyard, like evaporative cooling, which is kind of what happens underneath a tree too. Like it's cooler, much cooler underneath a tree than it is like even in the shade, and that's like an evaporative cooling because there's water stored there.
Right.
Yeah, that's the dream. It's hard to do in a lot of the projects I have because we have very small footprints that we can build in. So you really want like thick walls and
yeah.
So we're not able to do those on most of my projects. But.
Right. And then besides, of course, building these mega projects, you've also done some public art projects as well. I mean, you have an area of projects which I would recommend people. We'll put a link for people to check all your works. But for now, just tell us about that public art project that you did as well.
There's a couple of them. Yeah, one of them is this kaleidoscope. I guess this thing is part of it. This was one of the mock-ups for it, where it's like these spinning mirrors that are colored. It was in West Hollywood on the sidewalk on Santa Monica Boulevard. And yeah, City of West Hollywood kind of invited us to do this public art piece there. When we have these swing benches, like these two steel benches that we made that have a swing in them. So you can like kids can swing on them or adults too. And then these mirrored, it was supposed to be a triangle, but they wanted it to be open on one side, but it's these things you can spin and then there's all these colors on the sidewalk and the reflections of each other. So it's about like, putting art in the sidewalk, color, and then, connecting people with each other. Because when you're there, you're almost like meeting someone else, just like with one of these parklet projects.
Yeah.
And then there was another public art project that was pretty good. Was for the current LA? It was the city of LA had their first ever public art biennale, and I did it with this artist Joshua Callahan in the South LA Wetlands Park, where we built this kind of. It was a replica of the first European vessel to reach the Western United States, the San Salvador, from Cortez in 1500s. So, and we built this replica of it, but we built it with very like municipal materials, like that you would find on the street in LA, like a telephone pole for the mast, and then this black shade cloth for the sails. But we had it we worked with all these sailors, and we had it fully rigged up so we could deploy the sails. And it was about shade, like providing shade in LA and with public parks. But it was also kind of about, the colonization that goes on with a lot of like improving public parks and public space. Like there's a problem with some of the parklet projects I've done where they're used to like gentrify a neighborhood or something. Just when we're trying to do it for like street safety and more public space, but then like because it's nice, like it leads to the neighborhood being more expensive. So it's like these unintended consequences. So this art piece Mast was pretty powerful. But that was just a temporary. It was just for the year.
For the year. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you've done so many different projects and works. From what I saw on the website, they were all very impressive. I wonder, and we talked about this before, was you're interconnected to so many different identities and cultures, and so tell me a little bit about kind of the concept of identity, which is one of your favorite topics to explore. What is your current identity?
Well, I'm a Cuban Afghan. I mean, it's been me for the whole time. It's unavoidable. And it's been a strong thing because my mom is very Cuban, very proud of it, and always talking about life there. And my dad's very Afghan. He loves Kabul most of all. I think he's Kabuli. That's like what they identify with. But Afghan for sure, super proud, and always talks about how it is always, that the way of life. So I'm that, but I'm American. I mean, I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm from this neighborhood called Fox Chapel. Like, that's really like my identity too. And yeah, it's strange. I mean, I'm an Angelino for sure because I've lived here longer than anywhere. I moved here when I was 18, and I'm old now. So I'm an Angelino for sure, but you know, it really was rough. Like after 9/11, actually, like my uncle, one of my uncles who came over, and aunt, they were working at the airports, and they got thrown in jail with the Operation Tarmac just for being Afghan, just because they were just pushing wheelchairs at the airport, you know. But it's just anyone who works at the airport who's Afghan thrown in jail. So
Wow.
like that really, and then also before that, I was doing these for school. I was doing these. We were working on the freeways in LA. Like this is 2002, and we're like, just so I'm studying the structures of the freeways and figuring out how to build like housing and public space around them to kind of stitch neighborhoods back together. But when I got back to my car after like one of these session like explorations, there were these sheriffs there, and like I got interrogated, and yeah, I was on the terrorist watch list for a couple of years there too. So when that happened, it's like, where are you really from? Like you can't go back. You know, you're like, oh shit, like America. I don't know if they really want me to be here. Like, and then you're like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm Cuban. I'm not really Cuban. If I go back to Cuba, I don't. I mean, my Spanish is, I can understand it, but I'm a terrible speaker. And then yeah, Afghanistan. Like my dad, I always wanted to go. And my dad's like, you can't go because they know you're Hindu, and like they're gonna give you shit. It's like because they made my uncle who stayed to the 90s wear like stars, the Taliban, to identify themselves as Hindu, and they threw them in jail there for working, and then they come here and then they're thrown in jail for working. It's just like, so you really feel like, yeah, you're not really from anywhere. It's kind of tough.
You're from planet Earth.
I know, that's what I think. I know. I wish these nations are so horrible. I wish we could
Yeah.
just be human beings. I mean, all together.
Yeah, because that's what kind of happens is with identity, with people who with multiple identities and connections, we at the end of the day, we're just, citizens of planet Earth because there's no other way to define ourselves, as
Exactly.
you kind of mentioned, you're so interconnected to like at least four different identities
Yeah.
and geographically,
Right.
um yeah, with that. Yeah, so that's beautiful, I think, the way you put it out. You know and some people more than others. I think a lot of immigrants kind of maybe just handle two identities: the country they leave behind and the country that they adopt. But in your case, it's not just the country, it's also two countries plus the religious difference as well, and from Afghanistan, Hindus and Sikhs being a minority
Right.
as well. So you have all that going for you.
Yeah, and I think that's even complicated for my dad. Is like, am I Sikh or am I Hindu? Like, because they changed in the 1700s, so like they can't even explain it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tell me, kind of, having this relationship with your dad, where he's kind of recollecting the stories. A lot of people I talk to, for example, a lot of immigrants who come, they kind of go in this phase of detachment from the country because of just trying to heal in themselves. How about your dad? What has your dad been able to transfer to you of the cultural elements or stories of Afghanistan that you carry with you today?
I mean, so much. I don't know if he ever really. I think the only time he was traumatically like relating to it was after, after like the neighborhood was after the attacks after 9/11, after the U.S. attacked it. Um, but yeah, I mean, so many stories. It's mostly about, yeah, the communication, about respecting your elders and respecting your guests. Not taking too much credit for things. It's like the values of like not bragging or showing off your wealth, being very humble, um, being like ingenuity, being undefeatable, I guess, is like kind of the thing that they were kind of proud of, my family, that you can't conquer Afghanistan. But also, there's are you looking for some of like the more anecdotal stories that he would talk about?
Sure,
Like,
sure. Anything you wish.
I think the fruit. I mean, I guess I wasn't even thinking about that when we spoke before, but like all the fruit and the nuts, and like that's what he talks about a lot. I mean, his dad ran a store, and they had some farmland, I think, like up towards at the base of the Hindu Kush mountains. So yeah, they would collect, like, I mean, just the pomegranates and just so much. There's the melons and everything. I mean, there's so many fruits that he would talk about. But kite fighting on the roofs of Kabul, and just preparing your string with all these knives and glass, like shards of glass, to cut your opponent's string, and falling off of a roof, like doing that, and, and like just his mom like seeing him and getting in trouble.
Mm,
Um,
mm. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Those are beautiful stories. Yeah. I mean, beautiful anecdotes, because I always just wonder, out of curiosity, like, from a culture, from a generation to the next generation, what gets passed on, you know, through the stories. And it's interesting. Like, I haven't heard the concept of the fruits being mentioned before. Food for sure, but not fruits specifically.
When we get together with my aunts and uncles, there's like the best fruit is in Afghanistan. You know, like the
Yeah,
pomegranates are so like this fruit is not like they're just not satisfied with.
that's so true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, that's wonderful. And so for you, what is kind of in relationship to Afghanistan, what you kind of saw in August, or whatever is happening in the country, as a first generation, kind of, what are the emotional states you have gone through, and where are you with it now?
Oof. Yeah, I mean, we go back to because it's that was really. I mean, it's been so traumatic for since the '79. I think my family is always going back to Reagan,
Yeah.
especially. They really are mad about that. I mean, you could go to Carter too. So because that's when we had my aunt and uncle had to leave in '79, and then it's just like funding the mujahideen, it's like this is our problem from back then. You know, you have to go back to that. Even before that with FDR, I mean, you could keep going, but it's
Backwards.
that kind of anger that it just
Mm,
like don't meddle and why are we doing this? Like why
mhm,
Afghanistan never attacked us, you know, like why did we do that for 20 years?
mhm,
It's just so horrible. But seeing Kabul fall was really like emotional because I mean I follow a lot of the people there, like young people who are on social media or like restaurants or whoever has an account. I just try and follow as much as possible, and just I know like their lives really changed that day. Like it was kind of I was really mad that the US was there at all or ever attacked, but you know, there was seemed like there's something good happening in Kabul a little bit.
mhm,
So that was the saddest thing just when that happened at the end. And
mhm,
then just like holding their money now and just the humanitarian crisis that just like continues to get worse and worse. It's
mhm.
just
Yeah.
breaks my heart. I mean, it's a deep depression for a while for all of us, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and in need of healing. We're all in need of healing from that. Yeah.
Well, especially people there. I mean, it's just
Hmm.
yeah, I can't imagine.
That's so true. That's so true. Are there any, as we kind of wrap it up, are there any projects that are Afghan inspired or Afghan related that you're thinking of or will be exploring in near future?
I mean, my dad now. I got him like in an apartment nearby. Like I just moved them this past week, or they're still kind of happening. But then he's like finally committed because he hasn't worked on this book
Okay,
since 2016. So he said like a couple days ago, he's like, I'm ready to get back on that.
that's great. And I would
Just
love to have your dad on the show.
yeah, I think he'd love to talk to you. I'm sure.
Okay, let's do
Yeah,
it.
for sure. If he'd be interested, I'll
That
see.
would be wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, his stories are the real ones. I just have them secondhand.
No, this is a good. It was a good tease. You're a great first episode for your dad. You just set up your dad basically, and then we're gonna hear from him.
Yeah, and I have a lot of family, in Fairfax, Virginia, and there's a ton of Hindu Afghans there too. Which they're more because I grew up in Pittsburgh, so what felt we would visit, but you know they live it every day. They have a stronger. They keep the traditions alive.
God, yeah, that's wonderful. Well, this was a very special conversation with you, David.
Thank you.
Um, thank you very much. Mucho gracias. Gotta get it.
Gracias.
You gotta throw in a little bit of Spanish there,
Yeah,
honor your mom's side of the family,
definitely.
and buenos dias.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Adios. Bye.
Adios.